Hi everyone, this is an update on our vision screening data that we collected during the 2019-2020 school year. So you may recall that we added the Spot Photo Screener as a screening tool for all of our mass vision screening events. So we used both the Sloan chart and the Spot Photo Screener for grades 1, 3, 5, and 7. Additionally, we completed vision screening using only the Spot Photo Screener for all of our students in the Early Learning Center. For students who did not pass screening with the Spot Photo Screener, we printed out their results and sent that home with their referral letter. At the bottom of each vision screening form, we indicated whether the student was referred due to results on the Sloan, Spot, or both. We referred students to the eye doctor if they failed one or both of these measures. This is our district data for the number of students screened. However, when I analyzed the data, I only looked at elementary and secondary students in our public schools. I didn't include Early Learning Center students because we did not complete visual acuity screening as part of our mass screening. We only used the Spot. We use the visual acuity screening for students undergoing SPED evals who are over age 3, but not for anyone else. And additionally, when we do complete the visual acuity screening, we use a different tool, the LEA picture chart, rather than the Sloan. And the passing criteria for both visual acuity and the Spot are different than for K-8 students. I didn't include the non-public students because the grade of the student wasn't always specified, so I couldn't distinguish elementary from secondary, and because there were only 3 students who saw an eye doctor in that group. So for the K-8 students in public schools, we screened close to 2,500 students, and about 1 in 10, or 237 students, were referred. 136 students, or 57% of those referred, saw an eye doctor, and 83 students, or 61% of the students who saw an eye doctor, were prescribed glasses. We kept track of who was referred and for what reason. Of the 237 students referred, about a third were referred for both the Spot and the Sloan, meaning they didn't pass either one. A third for just the Spot, but they passed the Sloan, and a third for just the Sloan, but they passed the Spot. So you can see that in terms of the number of students that we send to the eye doctor, we're missing over 30% of our students if we only select one of these tools, either the Spot or the Sloan. But now we need to look at how sensitive those screening tools were. That is, how accurate were they in predicting whether a student actually needed a correction. So a quick reminder on terminology. Test sensitivity is the ability of the test to correctly identify those with the disease, or the true positive rate. Test specificity is the ability of the test to correctly identify those without the disease, or the true negative rate. And the purpose of school-wide vision screening is to identify children in need of further diagnosis and treatment. As such, screening procedures should be designed to cast a wide net, and one would expect this screening tool to be highly sensitive. However, it's impossible to test the sensitivity and specificity of screening tools unless students who pass the screening also participate in diagnostic testing to determine whether their passing results are valid. So all we can really look at is the subgroup of students who were referred and saw an eye doctor. That means that our sample size is now 136 students, not the 2,500 students that were screened. So these are the kids who actually make up our sample size, 93 from the elementary sites and 43 from the secondary sites. And these are our raw numbers showing who was referred at the elementary and secondary levels, why they were referred, and what the outcome was. But I think there's an easier way to view this data. So if you look at elementary as an example, of the 93 students who were referred and saw an eye doctor, 24 failed both the Sloan and the Spot and needed a correction. Another 9 failed the Sloan but passed the Spot and needed a correction. 14 failed the Spot, passed the Sloan, and needed a correction. 6 failed both the Spot and Sloan and did not need a correction. 18 failed the Sloan, passed the Spot, and did not need a correction. And 22 failed the Spot, passed the Sloan, and did not need a correction. And what I hope you notice here is that there are a number of students who fall into each of these different groups. We can use this data to compare these tools in a few different ways. One is to calculate the sensitivity of each screening tool. Sensitivity is the measure of how well each screening tool can identify true positives or correct referrals. So we take the number of correct referrals for one screening tool and we divide that number by the number of all the students corrected. So for the Sloan, there were 33 correct referrals. That's 9 referrals just for the Sloan, plus the 24 referrals for both the Sloan and Spot. We divide that number by the number of total correct referrals. 9 plus 24 plus 14, or 47. to get the sensitivity of the Sloan, which is 70.2%. Then we repeat that calculation for the spot. And there were 24 plus 14 correct referrals for the spot, or 38 correct referrals. So we divide that number by the total number of correct referrals, 47, to get the sensitivity of the spot, which is 80.9%. This is the data for the secondary sites, and we use the same process to calculate sensitivity for the Sloan and the spot. So here's the sensitivity for the spot and the Sloan at the elementary and secondary level. You can see that the spot is more sensitive for our elementary students, and the Sloan is more sensitive for our secondary students. Now we'll compare the devices in another way, and that is by looking at the specificity of the devices. The specificity is like the selectivity of the device. It's the ability of the screening tool to correctly identify those who do not need corrections. This data set is problematic, and which I'll explain in a moment, and it's easier to see why if we look at the secondary data as an example. So this time we're looking at incorrect referrals, or false positive screenings. These are students who were referred to the eye doctor for failing either the Sloan or the spot, and the eye doctor did not recommend a correction. So there were a total of 7 students in our sample at the secondary level who were not prescribed a correction. There were 6 instances when a student passed the spot, failed the Sloan, and did not receive a correction. These are true negatives for the spot because the spot correctly identified these students as not needing a correction, while the Sloan over-referred these students. If we divide those 6 true negatives by the total number of students not corrected, 7, we get 85.7%. That is the specificity of the spot in our sample. The real trouble starts when we look at the specificity of the Sloan. There were no instances when a student passed the Sloan, failed the spot, and did not receive a correction. These would be the true negatives for the Sloan because they would be the instances when the Sloan correctly identified these students as not needing a correction, while the spot over-referred these students. However, there weren't any true negatives in our sample in this case, which means that the specificity of the Sloan is 0 out of 7, or 0%. Remember that our sample group is, by definition, students we suspect need a correction. There are likely lots of true negatives out there for both the spot and the Sloan. Most of the 2,000 plus students who passed the Sloan and spot and were therefore not referred to the eye doctor are likely true negatives. The problem is that we don't have results from an eye doctor to confirm that these passing results are accurate. So when we try to calculate specificity, we're looking at a skewed population. Further, the disadvantage I see with looking at both sensitivity and specificity is that these calculations are dependent upon the 2 tools that we're trying to evaluate independent of one another. So how can we look at these tools independently and still compare them? And I think the answer is to look at the positive predictive value. The positive predictive value encompasses both sensitivity and specificity without relying on the results of the other tool. It tells you how likely it is that someone who is referred using each device will actually need a correction. So back to elementary, if we're looking at the Sloan, we're looking at the number of students with correct Sloan referrals. That's 9 plus 24, or 33. Divided by all students referred for the Sloan. That's 9 plus 24 plus 18 plus 6, or 57. 33 correct referrals divided by 57 total Sloan referrals equals 57.9%. Students who were referred for the Sloan received corrections 57.9% of the time. So here are the results for the positive predictive value for the Sloan and the spot at the elementary and secondary level. You can see here that the positive predictive value, can we trust that the referral will require a correction, is about the same for the spot and Sloan at the elementary level. The spot is a little better at the secondary level. I also listed the negative predictive values here. Can we trust that a pass is a true pass? But this number is problematic in a similar way to the specificity numbers because lots of students have true passes but aren't included in the sample because they don't see an eye doctor. There's a longer explanation for that in the slide notes if you're interested. So this table includes both the sensitivity and the positive predictive value for each screening tool at each level. So if you were looking at these percentages, you might be tempted to argue that we should consider the time and resources required to administer the Sloan versus the spot. And it might seem reasonable to say that we could replace the Sloan with the spot at the elementary level where it catches more kids than the Sloan and has almost the same positive predictive value. But looking back at these raw numbers again, specifically at the numbers of kids who needed corrections, At the elementary level, if you just did the spot, you'd miss 9 out of 47 kids, or 19%. That's almost 1 in 5 kids who need corrections. If you just did the Sloan, you'd miss 14 out of 47, or 29.8%. That's 3 in 10 kids. At the secondary level, if you just did the spot, you'd miss 19 out of 36 kids, or 52.8%. And if you just did the Sloan, you'd miss 4 out of 46 kids, or 11.1%. That's a little more than 1 in 10 students. So these are kind of my conclusions from going through this process. Adding the spot will result in more referrals and more corrections, especially at the elementary level. And if we remove the Sloan at the elementary level, we'll miss 1 in 5 students who need corrections. If we remove the Sloan for secondary, we'll miss half of the students who need corrections. And the spot is more sensitive than the Sloan at the elementary level and has a similar positive predictive value. Therefore, it's not appropriate to refer to the Sloan as the gold standard. The Sloan and the spot are both screening tools, but neither one is the end-all be-all. They catch different kids. So my recommendation, based on our data, is to continue using both the Sloan and the spot for all K-8 mass screening events, just like we did during our test year last year. Also, I think we should consider screening incoming kindergartners for the 2021-22 school year. Due to the lower participation in preschool programs and high rates of kids who either opted out of early childhood screening or completed early childhood screening virtually due to the pandemic without objective vision and hearing screening. I'm recommending that we screen these students using just the spot because they are not a recommended age group for acuity testing and because an entire class could easily be screened in 10 minutes, minimizing missed classroom instruction. Some additional takeaways not directly related to the Sloan and the spot comparison would be that referrals are more likely to result in corrections for secondary students, regardless of the reason for the referral. Also, perhaps the most important takeaway is that 43% of the students who were referred to the eye doctor did not go. That's over 100 students. And if we see correction rates similar to those in the group that did go to the eye doctor, that's 61 students that needed a correction that did not get one. This is really important. Screening takes a lot of time and energy, but if we don't follow up with families to make sure that students who are referred get the care that they need, then screening doesn't really accomplish anything. It doesn't really matter how many students complete screening. What matters is what we do with the students who don't pass. This is where we should put our time and energy, identifying and addressing the barriers to accessing care. Granted, we were encouraging parents to take their kids to the eye doctor last winter and spring, at the onset of COVID-19. Our follow-up rates might be better in non-COVID years, but it will be important to keep this in mind as we move forward. So that's it. Thanks to everyone for their hard work collecting this data, and hopefully you enjoyed this non-COVID related update. Happy spring.